Why do we feel the need to explain ourselves to people who never really listen? Think about that. Every time you over-explain, you give away a piece of your power. You hand it over, hoping that if they just understood your side, your heart, your why, they'd finally treat you right. But they don't, because they were never trying to understand you. They were trying to stay in control. The truth is, explaining yourself to the wrong people doesn't bring clarity. It brings confusion. It opens the door for them to twist your words, question your motives, and challenge your truth. The more you explain, the more room you give them to doubt you. And every time you try to prove your intentions, you forget your worth. Silence, on the other hand, is unshakable. It doesn't argue. It doesn't defend. It simply is. And that's what makes it powerful. It holds a boundary, a line that says, I know who I am. I don't need your permission to be it. But here's the catch. Silence makes people uncomfortable, especially those who rely on your reactions to validate themselves. They want the explanation because it keeps you small. It keeps you within their control. It keeps the story going. When you stop explaining, you stop feeding the drama. You end the performance. You walk off their stage. And in doing so, you reclaim your time, your energy, and your peace. Explaining might feel like clarity, but silence is clarity. Because clarity isn't about being understood. It's about being aligned with yourself, with your values, with your boundaries. So next time you feel the urge to explain, pause. Ask yourself, am I seeking clarity, or am I just trying to avoid being misunderstood? Because sometimes letting them misunderstand you is the most liberating thing you'll ever do. There's a certain kind of freedom that comes when you stop explaining yourself to the wrong people. But to fully embrace that freedom, you have to know who these people are. You have to recognize the patterns, the types of people who don't want understanding, but control, who don't want clarity, but compliance. The first type is the chronic doubter. No matter how much you explain, they always question your intentions. They twist your words, poke holes in your truth, and act like your feelings are just stories. These people don't want clarity. They want dominance. And the more you try to convince them, the more power you give away. Then there's the emotional trapper. They pretend to care, just enough to draw you in. But the moment you open up, they use your vulnerability as ammunition. They want you to explain yourself so they can control the narrative, not connect with your truth. With them, silence isn't just powerful, it's protection. Another is the guilt merchant. They live off your guilt. They don't listen to what you're saying. They only hear how it affects them. They'll make you feel selfish for setting boundaries, cold for choosing peace, and disloyal for growing. These people use your explanations as tools for manipulation. Your silence breaks that cycle. Then we have the illusionist, the ones who pretend to misunderstand you just to keep you engaged. They act confused, force you to repeat yourself, drag you into emotional loops. Why? Because if they can keep you explaining, they can keep you emotionally invested. Clarity for them means the end of their game. And finally, there's the superiority seeker. These are the people who never really listen because they think they already know. They hear you only to respond, not to understand. And they view your explanations not as truth, but as weakness. To them, silence is offensive because it challenges their control. When you recognize these patterns, something shifts. You stop feeling guilty for going quiet. You stop thinking you owe people access to your thoughts, your energy, your why. Because silence isn't withdrawal, it's a decision, a boundary, a mirror that shows people their own behavior without a single word. What most people don't realize is that the need to explain often comes from a deep fear of being misunderstood. We explain ourselves to avoid judgment, to feel seen, to feel safe. But when you over-explain, especially to the wrong people, you're not building trust, you're leaking power. Because healthy people don't need endless explanation. They don't twist your silence into offense. They don't demand to be inside every corner of your thoughts. They respect space. They sense your energy even when you don't speak. And most importantly, they listen without needing you to perform. But unhealthy people, they thrive on access, not connection, access. They want to be inside your mind, not to understand it, but to control it. And they use your explanations to open doors you were trying to close. So ask yourself, who have you been explaining yourself to? Who keeps pulling you back into justification mode? Who acts confused every time you try to protect your peace? Once you see it, it's hard to unsee. And you begin to realize you were never truly heard. You were managed, analyzed, handled, and in the process, you forgot your voice. But here's the truth. Your silence isn't a threat. It's a filter. It reveals who's willing to respect your boundary and who was only there to test it. You don't need to prove you're good. You don't need to justify your distance. You don't need to argue with someone who's already made up their mind. The strongest sentence you can say sometimes is the one you never speak. Let the silence carry your message. Let your energy become your response. Let your peace become your boundary. And when they ask, "Why are you so quiet?" remember this: people who respect your soul won't need an explanation, and people who don't won't believe one anyway. If you're tired of over-explaining your heart, subscribe and let silence be your voice from now on. There comes a point when you stop explaining, not because you're bitter, but because you're finally clear. You no longer feel the need to prove your intentions to people who enjoy misunderstanding you. You realize that some conversations aren't meant to be had. Some closures don't need to be chased. And some people just don't deserve access to your thoughts anymore. You don't owe clarity to someone who manipulates confusion. You don't owe peace to someone who feeds on conflict. And you certainly don't owe your voice to someone who only listens to respond. The truth is, we waste so much energy trying to make others see us the way we see ourselves. But that's a trap. Because the more you chase their understanding, the further you drift from your own. And you start molding your words, your tone, your truth, just to be accepted. That's not communication. That's self-abandonment. Silence, on the other hand, is alignment. It's choosing to stay rooted in who you are, even if no one else gets it. It's releasing the urge to fix perceptions you didn't break. It's saying, "I no longer perform for approval." And when you do that, something shifts. The noise fades. The guilt loosens, and suddenly you realize how much of your life was spent trying to explain yourself to people who had already decided not to hear you. This is the beginning of peace, not silence for the sake of silence, but silence with intent, with direction, with self-respect. It's the moment you walk away, not because you're tired of talking, but because you finally learned the value of your voice. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to argue to be right. And you don't have to explain to be free. Your silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means what you have to say no longer belongs to them. When you stop explaining yourself, people start showing their true colors. Some get angry. Some go quiet. Some try harder to bait you. Because your silence is a mirror. It reflects more about them than about you. And not everyone is ready to see what it shows. You'll notice how certain people feel entitled to your explanations, as if your clarity is something they're owed, as if silence is disrespectful. But silence is not the absence of respect. It's the presence of boundaries. And those boundaries were always there. You just used to decorate them with words, hoping they'd be understood, hoping they'd be accepted. But some people don't want to understand. They want access, control, comfort. And when you remove those things, they call you distant, cold, or selfish. But you're none of those things. You're just done sacrificing your peace for people who only value you when you're apologizing. You're done negotiating your truth to fit their comfort zone. This is the shift. You go from explaining to observing, from reacting to responding, from pleasing to protecting. And the ones who were only around because you made yourself small, they start to fade. Not because you pushed them out, but because your silence no longer gives them a place to stand. And that's how you reclaim yourself, not by shouting louder, but by saying less, by being unavailable for emotional games, by showing up for yourself in ways you always did for others. You'll feel the urge to explain again. That's normal. You've been trained to believe that silence is cold, but now you know it's sacred. Now you know it's a decision, a declaration, a doorway to a life where your peace is not up for debate. Let them wonder. Let them question. Let them sit with their version of the story. Because the people who truly matter won't need to be convinced. They'll feel your truth without a single word. The silence you choose isn't just about others, it's about yourself. It's not about punishing them, it's about protecting you. Because the truth is, every time you explain yourself to the wrong person, you chip away at your own sense of clarity. You water down your truth. You start translating your soul into a language that was never meant to be understood by them. And over time, that becomes exhausting. You don't just lose your voice, you lose your center, your peace, your alignment. But when you stop explaining, something else rises. Your inner compass, your boundaries, your sense of self. You start choosing peace over performance, solitude over approval, and you finally hear your own voice, unfiltered, undiluted, untouched by judgment. And that voice, it doesn't need to yell. It doesn't need permission. It just needs to be honored by you. You'll start noticing the shift, the moments where you would have explained yourself before, but now you simply smile. You hold your truth without needing it to be validated. You allow others to misunderstand you, and you feel no urge to correct them. That's not weakness. That's maturity. That's power. Because in the end, your peace is not a group project. It's a personal choice. And every time you choose silence over noise, boundaries over begging, detachment over defense, you win. Quietly. Completely. Let the world wonder why you no longer explain. Let them feel the absence of your justifications. Let them sit with the silence they once took for granted. Because maybe, just maybe, The version of you that no longer needs to explain is the version you were always meant to become. If someone misunderstands your silence, do they really deserve your truth? If that question echoed inside you, subscribe. Let silence guide you home, and tell us quietly below, what have you stopped explaining lately?